2 of our most downloaded episodes ever are related to drainage tile. And we haven't done anything talking about tile since February, Dave.
Yep.
And that's poor episode management by us, because we should give the listeners what they want. So here we are today talking drainage tile, and we're going to bust a whole bunch of myths around drainage and conservation efforts. And we are sitting here with our good friend Jason Brown. If you didn't listen to, he was one of the guests on a Farm for Fun show about 2 months ago. Go back and check that one out. But Jason, for our listeners, to remind them, why don't you tell them who you are and what your tie to agriculture is?
Well, as you said, my name is Jason Brown. I'm with the NACADE show. It's the North American Conservation and Drainage Expo. It's this is the first year for it. It's here in Des Moines, Iowa. And we're going to talk a lot about soil conservation and drainage water management. For my background in the industry, I own Mid-America Trenchers, which produces the Buckeye trenchers, the link plows. We do some string and trailers. I grew up in the drainage industry. I worked for contractors. I worked on equipment. I've done design, layout. There's no part of this industry I haven't been involved in. And one of the things that we keep hearing about is there's so many questions, there's so many myths. People know that tiling works. Put drain tile in, my yields go up. But they really don't understand why it works, what goes on, how to control some of the nitrate runoff, and all these other things. So some of us in the industry got together and decided we're going to organize a show that was open to the public. Anybody could come in. If you're a drainage contractor, you can bring your customers in and really do a lot of education. And the thing about our education is it's taught by the leading experts in the field. We've got Overholt Drainage School is in Ohio. They're sending people here. Iowa State puts on some good drainage schools. They're sending people. We have people out of the University of Minnesota. We have USDA people. Scott Cagle, he's an assistant conservationist for the state of Iowa. He's going to be talking about funding out of the new climate bill. You know, what's available, how to apply, things like that. He said it's going to be way better than you can get off the internet.
Nice.
So he's going to be doing that class every day.
And so we're giving our listeners a sneak peek.
Yep.
Because they get it here and now before your event. Because what are the dates again for your event?
January 17th through the 19th.
All right. But listeners are special, especially our listeners. So we're going to talk about some of the myths that are around drainage tile today, Dave.
And we get a sweet poll for internet listeners here. And it's, Mythbusters, there's Adam and Jamie, right? I'm going to assume that I'm Adam and you're Jamie, but I don't know how they're going to work this. You got the goatee, so I'm going to give you Jamie. I'll go Adam. And of course, we couldn't bust any myths about tile without a huge social naysayer, not social influencer, social naysayer, Mr. Tony Reed.
Well, I'd say half the ideas came from him because he doesn't think tile works.
Yeah, but he just tiled his first field this year, so he's actually going to get to see how tile works.
Ah, so maybe he's going to bust some of his own myths.
He very well might, and since he's going to be at the show, he's going to get set in on some of the education and some of the classes and see exactly how these myths are busted.
All right, well, I'll start us in. So the first myth is going to be like an environmental myth, okay? It's that tiling leads to more soil erosion. So compared to surface runoff, now we got water running through the tile and it's going to cause lower soil erosion. Is that true?
Not at all. Soil is like a sponge. You take a dry sponge, you put it in the sink, it soaks up, you fill it up, you wring it out, the water comes out, it can hold more water. The same thing works with soil and drainage tile. Is in your wet season, your drain tile removes the excess water. So when you get a big rain, it has storage capacity to hold that water so it doesn't just run off. If you have a field that is completely muddy, flooded, it does not get rid of the extra water, it's full. When you get a big rain, it's got to run off because it has no place to go. By doing that, you actually stabilize your soil, your fields. It keeps them from running off.
So I think the part of this myth came from looking at how riverbanks and creek banks continue to erode away when high volumes of water go down them, which one might assume comes from the tile outlet, Dave. But ultimately, those rivers and creeks all carry both tile water and surface water.
Yes, and surface water and subsurface water are completely different topics, completely different ways to manage them. One of the things that you do to help with all that is buffer strips. You know, I realize we all know land prices are up, cash rent's up, and everybody's gone to a fence row to fence row farming technique.
Oh, we get rid of the fences.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. Use your GPS pins and away you go. But you can use buffer strips, and we're going to talk about buffer strips. Not only does it help with the hold the banks, it also helps with the nitrate runoff.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have those big rains, you have a way to divert it, slow it down. One of the things is going back to some oxbows we're going to talk about. There's some government funding to go back to slow that water up. Yes, it's a little bit more difficult to farm around, but the NRCS is starting to crack down on some of the stuff. We're just going to make it as straight as possible and see how fast we can run the water down onto the neighbor.
Fun fact, the farm I'm selling next week has a saturated buffer strip on it that Iowa State is doing research on to see how much nitrate actually makes it to the soil.
Oh, there you go.
So if you want to participate in environmental practices, come buy a farm from me.
So we're actually going to talk about saturated buffers,
Yeah.
the installation process, and what they do at the expo. How much do you know about a saturated buffer?
I know very little, I can tell you that.
He's learning, he's baptism by
I
fire.
have baptism by fire. But I think it's supposed to go through NRCS, but the one I have is actually through Iowa State. I didn't realize that there's a contract. Now they're doing a study, so it's an Iowa State study and contract on it.
So Tony also was spreading, I'm going to say almost a rumor, because this doesn't even feel like a myth, that drainage tile causes more flooding. Are we more efficiently moving water to create larger floods downstream, or is that not the case? You just talked about slowing it down.
That's not the case. That's not the case at all. I mean,
But aren't we trying to get rid of water out of our field the fastest way possible? Isn't drainage tile there to help make it so we can go back and plant sooner?
it absolutely is. But when you think about how much water is actually coming out of that tube, because the water comes out the pipe 24/7. Unless you have a structure in there to control the water table, maybe raise it, hold it back in the summertime, it's a nice steady runoff. I mean, if you threw your hose out on the street, the water would run all the time, but you're not going to flood out your neighbor's basement.
Right.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, if it ran off the surface of your ground, you dumped a 5-gallon bucket
Right.
on the surface of your driveway, it's going to be a lot faster than a garden hose.
Right. If you went through and fell through the side of the wall of your neighbor's above ground swimming pool, drove your lawnmower through it, yeah, you can flood his basement.
Yep.
You're not going to throw it if you you're not going to flood it if you throw a sump pump in there and put the garden hose out the back.
So now you made a comment earlier that soil is like a sponge. I live on Sand Hill Trail, and it's very, very light sandy soil. I gotta assume that the sponge is based on the soil type.
Exactly. Sandy soil, the water passes through a lot better than what a black gumbo style heavy clay soil would.
Gotcha. So no, when to tile would be.
When to tile, where to tile?
Yeah.
Absolutely. But you can tile anywhere.
Absolutely.
If you wanted to.
As long as you have drain.
So there's another myth out there that, okay, Corey just went over his field, putting hydroson right now, and we got snow, we got rain, it's gonna melt this week. All that nitrate's gonna go right down the blooming tile and right into the Des Moines reservoir there, and we're gonna drink it.
No.
No, he says.
Drainage tubing will carry some nitrate across.
Okay.
Now, one of the things you can do is you can manage it with buffer strips.
Okay.
You can manage it with saturated buffers. You can put in a wetlands if you're doing a big pattern tile job or a huge acreage and run in there to collect some of those things. Will nitrates carry through the water? Yes, because they're in the water and they pass through. But much like the old days is, if you had a hog building, the guys who didn't actually knife it in, that would just dump it off and let it run on top of the hill, and then it would pollute the rivers. Nitrates are the exact same way. You can have responsible drainage, responsible nitrate application, and be fine. There are some people out there that are unresponsible. It's like alcohol in a car. You know, somebody can sit there and go and you can have a Busch Light right here, then have 3 glasses of water and wait an hour and responsibly drive. Or you could drink a whole case of Busch Light during a farm for fun, get your truck and drive home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is it the truck's fault or is the applicator's fault?
Right, and that makes a lot of sense. But how do you monitor that? Because tiling is unregulated. It's an industry that's unregulated. Nobody pays attention.
Well, tiling's actually pretty well regulated. If you know anything about tiling, you know about a 1026 wetlands determination form. So if you're in a government program and you do any drainage work, you better have a 1026 wetlands determination form, because if the government determines that you tiled a section of ground that was not eligible, they can throw not only that farm out, they can throw every single acre of ground you farm from the government program, including crop insurance, which you as a banker would not appreciate it if somebody tiled 10 acres that the government said, hey, you're not going to do this, went on ahead and did it anyway, and then came in to renew their operating note, and you could not have any crop insurance.
How do they know you put tile in though?
Their neighbor turns you in.
I was gonna say.
Or a Google map, you know, an overflight. There have been some people.
Yeah, because there's no way to install tile right now without disturbing the surface of the ground.
Exactly. Exactly. Somebody always talks about it. Dave, do you have a list of people that don't like you for some reason?
Oh,
Everybody likes
Yeah.
Dave.
Everybody.
Yeah. So somebody mentions it to one of those people, and they tell somebody,
Dang do-gooders.
and there you go.
Yikes. Yeah, so is it true that it's unregulated, or is it more closely monitored? Is there permits you have to have?
You do, in some states, in some areas, you actually have to get a permit from the NRCS office to tile if you're going to be on the up and up. I mean, you can hire a contractor, they can come in and tile it,
Sure.
but they can also make you come dig it up.
I was gonna say, there's a lot of farmers I know that don't tile plows.
Yeah,
We talked about that. That
Yeah.
it may not be the best form of doing it, but are they really calling and getting permits to go put this in the ground?
So now I got a question. We should do an episode on taxes. If it's not really regulated, our myth, okay, who could XYZ contractor give me a bill for putting in tile, and then I'm gonna 179 deduct it and take it off for taxes?
sure, if you like fraud.
Right, you have to,
I
you have to
mean-
be able to prove it.
So it might be regulated by the IRS eventually.
That's true.
Everything is somewhat regulated, and what everybody needs to remember is, you know, tiling is just like any farm practice. You're always going to be one administration away from somebody in a government office saying, I think we need to dip our hands deeper in this pool.
Right.
You know, and this is the rule. I mean, I don't like to talk politics that much, but if you look at what goes on with the EPA, if you look at what's going on even with the DOTs with trucks right now, you know, the DOT has come out and said is if you're a high-risk carrier, we think we should just electronically tag you so we can monitor your trucks at any point in time. You know, this is one of the reasons why we're taking a more active approach in the education, because we don't want to see our industry end up like this. Like, okay, somebody from the government's got to come out every 3 months and take a water quality sample,
Right.
or else we'll put a cap in it. Because there are some areas that the water cleans up, because now all of a sudden is by tiling you're managing your root zone. So in the spring, if you have a really wet area, that corn root doesn't have to go very far to get to the water. But if you lower that water table when you put that corn crop in and you make that root chase 2 or 3 feet, or 4 feet, depending upon the area, to get down there to where that easy water is, because the drainage has pulled the excess out.
Right.
Now all of a sudden is, you've got 3 foot of root zones, or 4, whatever your depth is, to soak up all your nitrates, every bit of nutrients out of that soil, instead of just laying there on top, which makes better use of your soil. It also, the root goes down, it breaks up the soil, it puts more oxygen in the soil, which makes the soil better. Soil is a living organism. You know, it needs the proper nutrients, it needs the proper air, it needs the proper water. And drainage helps with all that.
It's like he knew what the next myth Tony suggested was.
Mm-hmm.
And that tiling was bad for soil health. And he kind of busted that one already. So you said that not only does it allow that plant to get better access to the nutrients, that it puts oxygen in the soil. How does it do that?
Well, when you break that soil up, if it's very compacted soil, and you spread it, there's something that takes place there. When it's broke up, it's air, it's water.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Isn't soil compaction bad for soil health though? And you're bringing these big machines in here and you're digging it out, and so there's a little soft spot in the center and we pack the soil down on the sides. Isn't that bad for the...
Well, if you think about the big machines, we're on big tires. Some of us are on tracks. We don't really get the compaction unless you're just spinning like hell in the mud. And then yes, you may have to work it at some point for right there. But I would say is that 20 years ago, 20, 25, longer than I want to admit to, I was on a river bottom that was just super black. It was some of the nastiest stuff that you could get. We did it with a wheel machine, which depending upon your areas, depends upon what you use. And the farmer actually, we had him break up his corn stalks. We put the spoil, the dirt that comes out of the wheel, on the corn stalks. Then we used what's called an auger backfiller. And think about like a big sweep auger in your bin, we sweep that dirt back in. But it blends it because of the way it picks it up and turns it. We actually came through, put the spoil on the corn stalks, use the auger, blend it all up, put the soil back. Now that soil right there above that ditch had this nice vertical mass. He put anhydrous on it, he ran it to corn the next year. The anhydrous of course helped it rot a little bit. And those corn roots that had before could not go down very far and break up that soil, had that soft spot, came down, broke it up, completely different field, 140 bushel difference the next year.
Whoa, that's a big difference.
Which, you know, in the 1996, when corn was $2, it was a big deal. But today, $6.50 corn, you can pay for a drainage job pretty quick with all these things. Tanner, you're into money. You like to know how money works.
I do.
So my grandfather, 20 years or 70 years ago when he started tiling, he's been gone several years, his slogan was tiling doesn't cost, it pays. I always like that because, you know, it pays. A neighbor growing up back home, he had a better say. It takes a rich man to own a mud hole. Because he said, no matter what, I put the same inputs and I spend the same dollars on that acre and hoping that the year is just perfect, that I'm going to get that top level yield out of it. When 9 years out of 10 it drowns out, it's hard because we can't get any roots down through it, we can't do any of these things, and I don't get very much from it. So I must be rich if I continue just to dump money into a loser field.
Tanner,
or I can fix it.
To the first year that we put on the conference, one of the sponsors was a software program that would take those acres out of production. And you think, what? Take acres out of production? They would only put good acres into good production. So like you said, it takes a rich man to farm in the mud, I guess, if you will. But so you just brought up something, 75 years, 25 years. I'm thinking longevity. And isn't there a myth out there, Tanner, like you can't clean, I mean, once it's in, you can't clean it, right? Or take it out, like it's going to screw you over in the future.
That's true. What happens if it gets plugged up? Can you even fix it?
There's a whole list of people's ideas on that. Yes, you can, if you don't keep up your outlet and it fills full of mud, sometimes you lose the field. Or sometimes you lose the drainage system. I've also seen clay tile that was put in the 60s that had a 1/4 inch of room on the top, that once you gave it a good outlet, that water still wants to start moving, and it'll sit there and it'll start washing itself clean, which then opens the whole realm of internet opinions on what you should do with those old lines when they're that full. You know, do you patch them into your new system and risk all that dirt? Do you patch them back into the old system that doesn't work? One of the more popular ideas is to take a piece of plastic tubing, put it into the upper end of that, run it down and crush like 4 foot and just let water can sit there above your new tile so that way it drains in and you can't get any of the dirt. If you keep your outlets up, the thing should have a 100-year plus life cycle.
Wow, that's a lot longer than 10 years. That's a long time for drainage tile. I mean, I was imagining that you got to send a snake or a roto-rooter up your tile line, but for some of these tile lines that are a quarter or half a mile long, that's a really long cable trying to clean out my dryer bed.
Does anybody do directional boring for tile?
Only to cross the road for an outlet.
That'd be a pretty big borehole.
Directional borehole, yeah.
Yeah, if I will send you guys some pictures of some of my customers out in Indiana, Ohio, when they cross railroad tracks or cross under a paved county road for their mains out there. You know, you get east of the Mississippi, you get into the county mains that sometimes are 36 inch, 30 inch, 24 inch, because they're pulling huge amounts of acres and draining them off. So yes, they definitely bore those like that and pull new plastic tubing under the road.
So I've heard a myth, but it isn't one that Tony recommended. So in Iowa, we got drainage districts, and you can't get on the drainage district, so there's no point in putting in tile because they won't let me in their drainage district, and then they're gonna fine me.
You know, you can't cross district lines.
No, like if you weren't, like when you bought the farm, if you weren't included in that drainage district, you can't get into that drainage district.
Are there places in the state that are not in a drainage district, Jason?
There are places that aren't in the drainage district. The places where a drainage district really applies is in places so flat there's no outlet. Like if you have areas where I'm from in southwest Iowa, everything's dumped in the road ditch or the waterway or the creek or something right across there. Now if you get in areas of northern Iowa where it's as flat as this table for 20 miles across, then there is some county mains and hookup. I am not the expert on drainage districts, but what I can tell you is the two people that are will be at the expo. The executive director of both Iowa and Illinois Association of Drainage Districts will be there and doing classes on this very topic.
That would be helpful.
Well, see, I sold a farm once that had drainage district, I would call it encumbrance. And I went to the meeting before we sold the farm. And it basically said all the local farmers got invited. It just so happens the person I was selling for got the letter. We went to the deal. The county supervisor ruled that all the farmers, they were going to tax them more money to clear, to dig out, to clean out the drainage district. And so the farm I was selling would be responsible for that encumbrance eventually. Farmers weren't too much of a fan of paying a little more money to clean that up for the county.
So you told us that you're going to send pictures of how your tiling buddies have gone under highways, under railroad tracks to try and get to an outlet. So that kind of busts the myth that I can't tile because I don't have anywhere to outlet to.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the exhibitors that's going to be there is they do solar power lift stations. So if you don't have electricity nearby, they're setting up solar panels and running their lift pumps off of that.
Okay, so how does that, obviously they have another backup source of power because if the solar battery dies, it stops lifting.
They have battery backups and solar panels, the same as everybody else does for their solar applications. I think you can buy a diesel backup generator for that, or you can run the power in. I've seen their stuff. I've talked to them a little bit. They're one of the vendors that I'm really excited to sit there and learn more about myself from at the show. If you've never been around a lift station really is basically a huge plastic pipe with a bottom. We put it in the ground. It's your shallow well with your pumps, and we just pump that water to the surface and let it run off a surface drain.
Is there any way that irrigation and tile work together?
Absolutely. ADS invented it in the 80s, and they called it irridrain. And they put the laterals super close together. They put them really flat, and in the spring, you would pull the water off, and in the summer, they would put it back. One of the other people that's going to be there is Chris Hayes with the Iowa Soybean Association. They've been doing studies here locally about drainage water recycling, whereas they're digging pits, letting the water run off, pumping it back up the tile in the drier season.
Put it back in the tile.
Yep.
Not even new lines.
That's
or
what I
No.
know on my sandy soil.
Yeah,
When it gets warm, nothing but weeds.
and they're pumping it back up into the poor areas. So here they have this water. They did not now let this water run off and create all the mess with flooding and
Right.
soil
They
erosion.
captured it all.
They captured it all. So in the heat of July and August, they're pumping that water back up into the poorer soils. And guess what? It's fertilized water because any of that nitrate that ran off
Sure.
is setting in that water. And now in your poor areas of your farm is getting a water miracle grow right up, back up the tubing. Now, is this cash flow positive yet? Is it to those stages? I don't know, but Chris will be able to tell us where they're at.
We had a conversation at Farm Progress Show with Kelly Garrett, and he's a big fan of NutriDrip. So it's an irrigation setup that he had to dig a large well for in order to, get the PSI that he needed to pump it through on these fields. I could see if you had a way of digging your deep pit, collecting your tile runoff,
Yep,
or not your tile runoff, your tile drainage.
yep,
And that would aid wherever you were pumping water out of, another pond or whichever it is, that you could probably combine the two.
I like it.
That's a good question, Dave.
Recapture tax.
Yeah, basically, yes.
Bring it back up, it costs you a little bit, but maybe less than, maybe make it back in product.
So you already kind of busted what Tony asked next. He doesn't think tile can last at all. He thinks people are manufacturing it and not making it to where you would have to put more in later because it failed. But you said its useful life's properly maintained 100 years.
with proper installation.
Okay.
It's drainage systems like anything else. Poor installation, poorer products, and it's gonna fail earlier than what a quality installation and a quality product works. Now, one thing about the expo is, all the education is by neutral party. So there is going to be Dan Kearns with Plastic Pipes Institute, which they help set all the regulations or all the specs for pipe to meet to be certified. They are big into this. So as last time I had Craig and Brad with me, Brad's company is known for virgin material. Craig's uses a lot of uses recycle. Darla Huff with ADS who's involved. They use recycle. Prinsco has a recycle, and they have different blends, and everybody has their own thing. When you start talking about installation, there's wheel trenchers, there's plows, there's different types of bottoms, there's different depths, there's different grade controls, there's all these different things. So for the insulation part about why pipe fails, Dan is teaching it. Because Dan is a neutral party to everybody. Everybody belongs to this, everybody pays the money into it. So at no point are we letting somebody who's going to directly benefit teach a class. It's all about keeping the neutral, keeping it so it's discussed, keeping everything back so everybody can have an open mind. I'm really looking forward to Tony sitting in on some of these classes because there's going to be a lot of smart people with a lot of great education, and that when he's going to have all the questions that everybody else does, that we can bust a lot more of these myths and a lot more in depth.
Great stuff, great stuff. Well, I tell you what, I'm going to summarize just a little bit on kind of where we're at, and then Tanner will give a challenge. So, listeners, today we're talking with Jason Brown, and we have the, tell me the official name. What is the official name of our conference coming up?
The North America Conservation and Drainage Expo.
So we are busting myths today. We're talking about soil erosion, and does tile do that? Does it contribute to a higher flooding rate? Maybe overland flooding or flooding in the ditch and in the rivers. Does it contribute to water quality problems? Is there more nitrates and more everything that we put on our crops, from pesticides to insecticides to anything? Is it unregulated? I think we've busted a ton of these myths. Is it bad for your soil? Can it be removed? Can I change the outlet? I don't have an outlet. Can I install tile? And everything else that Tony Reed might have thought was bad about tile, we kind of covered a little bit here today, and we sure appreciate you answering those. I'm looking forward to the conference because we're just dipping in. I mean, just barely, and this is gonna be the biggest players, the biggest industry partners, but non-biased industry partners that are going to give us education to make sure that we are doing everything right to install and maintain tile.
Yeah, I think one of the myths that I would think of is there's no educational opportunities for our listeners to go and learn about tile and learn about doing it properly.
Oh, good myth, yeah.
But that's exactly what you guys are doing with Naked.
Well, absolutely. So I can list several great small associations that do some of the education. But you have to be a member of the association. You have to do these things to get to any of the education. We need to do a better job of educating and advocating for our industry. If those of us in the industry are not willing to advocate and educate for it, then what's going on? That we need to start taking more of a leadership role in our industry with the education, with what's going on, and advocate for all the better ways that we can do things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my challenge, Dave, and I think everybody's expecting it, is you gotta go. You gotta go and learn. And it's not just to learn about, can I put tile on my farm, or what can my farm benefit. We know that's already gonna happen. It's what technologies are available. I had no idea that there were solar powered lift stations. I had no idea that there were independent studies out there that could actually provide value to my exact area in which my farm is. And then I would say lastly, it's the amount of people that you're gonna get to meet there. You're gonna get to come down and hang out with people that are dealing with the same issues, whether it's related to tile or conservation or drainage, or it's just related to farming.
We talk about it all the time. That's why we have What's Working in Ag. Our What's Working in Ag section is coffee shop talk. Well, coffee shop talk, except this is going to be very specific.
Yeah.
And it's going to be what's working in tiling. So
Absolutely.
with that, Jason, give us the dates one more time. When is the conference and how do they sign up?
January 17th through the 19th.
Okay.
And sign up will be on the website.
Which is? Do we know what the website is yet?
We do. It is NACADEXPO.com.
All right, perfect. Listeners, thank you again for hanging out with us. We really appreciate you. We hope to see you in January down at the conference. We'll be hanging out there. But until next time, have a good one.